the study of universal grammar, so understood, is the study of the nature of human intellectual capacities. It tries to formulate the necessary and sufficient conditions that a system must meet to qualify as a potential human language, conditions that are not accidentally true of the existing human languages, but that are rather rooted in the human language capacity, and thus constitute the innate organization that determines what counts as linguistic experience and what knowledge of language arises on the basis of this experience. In other words, Chomsky says that universal grammar is, quote, the theory of the genetic basis for language acquisition. But calling the genetic basis for language a universal grammar presents a problem. We cannot call electrochemical reactions and neuronal architecture a grammar, except to say that these processes cause a grammatical representation in the mind. We can only discuss that which occurs at an electrochemical or neurophysiological level and that which is represented consciously. To call the genetic basis for language a grammar would be to confuse the mental representation with the cerebral process. We'll come back to this later. Great. Universal grammar is therefore only referring to the potentiality that all humans possess to create representations of a universal grammar code, necessarily caused by cerebral processes. It is a code for language use whose components permit a culturally learned code for language, or a generative grammar, to be internalized and used by the speaker to convey his or her thoughts. This is what is ultimately being represented in the mind, produced by what is happening in the brain. It is important here to highlight that this view of mind-brain is not dualistic, but rather based on cause and effect. However, Chomsky suggests that generative grammar deals with, quote, mental processes that are far beyond the level of actual or even potential consciousness. This seems unlikely if we're to consider universal grammar not as the genetic basis, but rather as the representation that that genetic basis produces, which would occur at a conscious level. With effort, then, we can understand the representations most closely linked with the cognitive faculty and instinct. We'll circle back to the notion of effort later. The language capacity that Chomsky refers to in 1965 has come to be referred to as the language faculty. Cognitive faculties are cerebral processes and their learning mechanisms that emerge from our genetic code and are used to perform specific tasks. Though some would say that many general cognitive abilities give rise to language use, evidence makes clear that one of those specific tasks is for language acquisition, or the learning mechanism, and language use itself. Thus, language does not depend on having an aptitude for memorization and use of symbols. It is instead caused by an instinct that produces a learning mechanism which takes over during brain maturation.